If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The Level Blue Futures Report 2024 sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business context that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today by visiting securityweekly.com/Level Blue. Cybersecurity simplified. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. All right, gentlemen, articles for the week. Now, there's one article we're going to cover that I actually have 3 versions of it open because it was such big news. I guess apparently big news. I'll let everybody wait until we get to that one to see what it is. But this first one, I love this first article. PwC basically urges the boards to give CISOs a seat at the table. Finally?
Yeah, I was going to say, how many years late now? Welcome to the show, PwC. Welcome to the show. I mean,
yeah, a little ridiculous, huh?
Yeah, I mean, great that they're evangelizing it. I mean, it's a little late, but you know, they went out and they polled 4,000 businesses, I think is what ended up they polled, right, with their executives, and you know, it's kind of, some of the numbers are a little shocking, not shocking, disappointing, I guess. 2% of the responding organizations have implemented some type of a cyber resilience program across all the different areas. Only 2%. I mean, I didn't think it was going to be great numbers, but only 2%.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yep. Well, even 2/3 of tech executives rank cyber as the highest risk for mitigation. But then on the other hand, you know, it wasn't one of their top concerns. There's one in here about, another symptom of poor alignment between business and cyber goals is the fact that just 15% of respondents are measuring the financial impact of cyber risks. You don't say.
I know. The numbers feel like they're getting worse, not better.
I know. And you know, we thought with some of the SEC guidance that came out last year, right, that we would be in a better position to kind of measure our risks and be able to report on it and be prepared. But I'm not sure that we're actually there. And I don't know that we're going in the right direction, to your point, Jason, right? Like, you would expect more than this by now, but we're not.
No. And I mean, you know, one of the other numbers that was kind of sad for me to read was less than 50% are involved in strategic planning for cyber investment. Less than 50% of executives are involved in strategic planning.
Well, that's the problem, though, right? Like, it's the seat at the table. Like, okay, so pick one other C-level executive that, if the headline was, you know, boards urge, to give CFOs a seat at the table. Boards urge, you know, to give CROs a seat at the table. Like, it's just silly. Like why not the cyber guy? The largest risk your company has, typically. Like, probably a good idea to clue him in, pull him. So I think we've talked about this before. For a long time, I think it's this perception of, like, you know, people just wanted the title. They wanted to be in the role. But, like, how do you do the job if you don't understand what the business is doing? And if you're not sitting in the room, like, it's not a desire to be part of the club. It's a desire that we can't do our dang jobs if we're not in the room understanding where the business is headed.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the people who decide who gets the seat at the table do not see us as a strategic role.
Yeah.
They just don't see us as a strategic role, because there are leaders the CEO and probably the CFO with some influence who decide who has that seat at the table. They're not giving us the seat at the table. And if they are, it's a seat to have the seat and name, not with influence. That's a sad part.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we talked a little bit about this on the previous segment about the complexity of that organization, right? That you just think, I just throw a CISO in place and they handle everything. But we just talk through all the complexities of managing security across multiple businesses or business lines, et cetera. And all these other executive departments have their supporting staff, but yet some single CISO is going to solve all the cybersecurity challenges across an entire organization?
Yeah,
not really.
So, I do think there's a corollary to private institutions, right? So private companies generally, like the CISO will have an HR business partner, right? And that kind of works, but they're not part of your team. They're part of HR, right? You'll have somebody in finance who helps you out. So it's these conflicting objectives, right? And they know the HR business partner, the finance guy, they all know that you don't have a seat at the table. So ultimately, you don't have the juice necessary to get done what you need to get done.
Yeah. And those folks are going to sit back and say, is this the hill that I want to die on? And the answer the majority of the time is going to be no.
Right.
Because the influence isn't there, right?
Right. So if you want to learn how to get some of that influence, this book review, Premier CISO Boards in the C-Suite, might be a guide. I have not read the book. I pulled this up, and it tries to give you some practical advice how to navigate some of this. I'm curious. I'm going to go pull this book because I want to read it because I'm curious. Does it tackle some of these challenges that we were talking about? The outline seems to a little bit, looks like it's going to try to tackle some of these issues to get the CISO in a better position. I'm just not sure how deep he goes in the book, but I had to pull this in after that first
article.
I haven't
read it yet, but I will say that the structure, the outline that they provided made me want to go grab it too. So, it based on that and based on this article, it definitely made me want to go get the book. So we'll see. We should do a review session as part of our.
We should
at some point.
Okay, homework assignment for all of us hosts. We got to go read the book and then come back and critique it later. Okay. I'll give us all a little bit of time. We have day jobs to keep us a little busy, but yeah, I am curious though because like I said, the outline of the book looks very appealing to people who are trying to figure out how to navigate some of these issues that we just.
Have you read it, Ben? Or
I have not read it. I was kind of just doing a little I'm not so. Premier CISO, I don't know Michael. I don't know if you guys know Michael or have interacted with him, but I'm not seeing a lot of Fortune experience or it's just so yeah, it'll be interesting to read to see where he pulled from and if it aligns. So yeah, I think I don't know, in a couple weeks or a couple months, we'll pull this one back up again and see what we think.
I like it.
Like it. All right. So this next topic, I pulled 3 different articles on this. It was such good news, I guess, or popular news. Anyways, CISO Salary Surge, fewer job changes, bigger paychecks for experienced cybersecurity leaders. And there's a little trick in one of them that if you threaten to leave, you'll get a counteroffer with about a 31% increase. So you don't even actually have to leave to get a pay raise. Anyways, 3 different articles on this topic of now the average CISO salary is just north of 550,000. I think it was like 564 or something like that. So the salaries are growing, but I'm not sure that people are still hiring.
Do you believe it?
CISO.
Well, so this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to say I can't wait until next year's version comes out. Looking back at 2024. Because I have a suspicion that this is going to be different numbers, right? Because at the end of the day, have we seen how many layoffs are happening? Have we seen that?
Yeah. These are also self-reported, right? So I know some of these surveys, and I've taken some of these surveys, and the data is generally self-reported. So I'm not sure of how much of it's aspirational, trying to get the bubble up, or where this is coming from. But in talking to other colleagues, peers, people who are in the market right now, I don't know. I want to see some more long-term data on this and actually understand it. I mean, the numbers are, I do know I do know that there are jobs out there where the high end numbers exist, but I just, averages and how this all comes down, the devil's in the details.
Yeah. And toward the end of the article, it says the report also notes that fewer companies are seeking CISOs and fewer CISOs are seeking new companies.
Right. Well, because we've seen this drop off, right? We've seen we've seen people leave the role and companies not rehire the role, right? So we are definitely seeing a downtrend in the number of CISOs. I mean, we've covered this before. I think only 48% of the Fortune 500 has a named CISO, right? Like, so it's almost conflicting data a little bit. Like you see these salaries go up, but then we see CISOs leaving, going into vCISO roles, and those positions not being refilled. And so how much of this is aspirational maybe, Ben, versus actually reality across
look, also some of it's weird when you see, so I saw a role posted, and I know a little bit of the history of the role, like previous CISOs in the role and compensation and stuff. And like the role they're posting right now, it aligns with kind of the median on this. But like, I know the challenge and why the CISO left, and I know why previous CISOs left. And I'm like, you're not going to get a guy who's making that type of money, who's going to be willing to put up with what, you want in the role. So it just, there's a lot of, again, it's the details. It's where the specifics align. And I'm really interested to see how this nets out. To Jason's point, let's see what happens after the election into 25. Let's see who's hiring. You could say that the salaries are super high, but if there's a bunch of people on the sidelines looking for jobs right now and they're not getting jobs, like that's questionable too, right?
Oh yeah. I want to see the 2024 year in review. That's what I want to see.
Yeah. So next article kind of ties in our previous segment. Overtaxed state CISOs struggle with budgeting and staffing. What I'm hoping is that parts of the last segment can actually help some of these CISOs here in the US. Now, I've seen some progress here, by the way, because we're actively working with a couple of the state CISOs on cyber risk quantification programs. So we are seeing some really interesting movement of trying to measure their risks, understand where to prioritize, how to justify budget. So we are seeing some traction here, but this article doesn't paint a rosy picture for the state CISOs who are still struggling.
No, and at the end of the day, those CISOs face a lot of the same constraints that your private sector CISOs face, but they also have all of those different pressures that we talked about before in the previous segment, right? They have union issues, constituent issues, elected officials. Think about this. Their board of directors are elected officials that could potentially cycle out every couple of years.
Right.
Think about that. Think about if you were in an organization that had a new board of directors every 2 years. That'd be pretty tough, right? So there's a lot of pressure that's happening with these CISOs.
And you have to think like what their general concern is around those elected officials, and it's generally not cyber, right? And then combine that with like low budgets that they're just not receiving. I think that's the budgeting is the one thing that I always see on the state and local government side. It's just getting funding. It's just super hard. And nobody wants taxes to go up, and this is an area where like it's seen as a nice to have, not a must have, unfortunately.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing, right? We've talked about on the show a lot of times about some of the strategies that I employed when I was a CISO, right? And it's, hey, how do I show security's influence on things like revenue, closed won opportunities? How did I help drive revenue to the business, right? Because that's a motivator. That is actually one of those needles that they're looking at all the time. Well, if you think about it from a public sector side of the aisle, city, state, whatever the case may be. All right. Well, what are some places you can align to help the elected officials look good, right? To help the elected officials get some of their top priorities done. And at the same time, you're making some pretty good progress for the state or the city. It's figuring out all those influence levers that you can pull on at the end of the day, and then being able to get the programs in that you need to get done. It's influence. We talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how to navigate the environment to create that influence as part of it as well.
It's not the motivator in the public sector isn't revenue, it's votes. For your board of director, it's votes. Let's just be completely clear. It's 100% votes.
Yeah, for sure. This next article talks about how to maximize alignment between security and compliance teams. But I was this article, I had to, there's some things in here that are good, but there's a line in here that just kind of irks me a little bit. On the deepest level, both compliance and security have the same goal: minimizing risk to the business. Fully get it. Compliance increases organizational security, and strong security improves your compliance posture. Really? Like, I'm not quite sure that's actually how this works,
I know,
right?
Exactly.
You're driving compliance to check a box, which doesn't necessarily increase your organizational security. Like, I've not seen that work that well, folks. Like, if it did, we wouldn't have all these healthcare issues because of HIPAA. Like, come on.
You have to understand, I think, the motivation behind compliance, right? And so compliance in general, at least in my mind, I'm interested in your guys' view if you're different from me, but it's foundationally formed because there is a requirement to meet a baseline, which without compliance potentially wouldn't exist, right? And so it's the incentive to ensure people are at least doing something, right? But I challenge the problem with compliance. It moves slow. It's often, again, just that baseline, that lowest pole to hop over. And so, in my past, I worked for a large company, and we looked at, compliance around PCI. And one of the things was file integrity management. Look, I understand file integrity management. I understand why it's there. But if you're not really doing it right, just checking the box and saying you have an agent that's deployed out there to do file integrity offers very, very little value for the cost return. I could have taken that money and spent it on something else that would have driven a much better security posture, but I was forced to, from a compliance side, to comply with PCI. That's the perfect example of where, it's not necessarily a great thing to have compliance. It's how do I run a security program the right way? And the end result is I get compliance out of it, right? Because I'm doing all the right stuff.
And you start with risks and understanding your risks to figure out where should I be prioritizing certain controls. And it shouldn't be based on regulatory pressures per se. Now, maybe one of your risks is not being compliant and therefore not winning a contract. That's very valid, by the way. But if you don't put it in some sort of risk management framework, how do you actually know that it's a risk to the business versus something else that may not have anything to do with a regulation?
Yeah, and you want to know what the biggest problem I see, though, in so many instances, compliance is binary. It's on or off. It's yes or no. Does it exist or does it not exist? It doesn't test the maturity or how effective the controls actually are, or the adoption of the controls.
It's a state in time inspection,
yes.
Right? So there's not a continuous model where you're saying, okay, you're doing X control, check, the day after you're not doing it anymore, right? Like, how do you ensure that it's happening on a regular basis and you're actually ensuring security? Like, they're not the same.
Is it effective? Is it mature? Is it continuous, right? There's all of those other things. Is it adopted? Yes, you have the control, but if only 20% of the organization has it adopted, that's no good, right?
Well, I spoke at a conference last week, and it was around insurance. And like, that was one of the questions is, why are insurers so bad on figuring this out? And it's because, and it happens in third-party risk too. You ask the question, are you doing MFA? Well, that's a binary question. Yes, I am. I'm doing it on 2% of my systems. Like, okay, well, it's completely useless then, right? Like, you're not really doing it. And so check the box, binary compliance, not functionally enhancing your security. And you may get the contract, but you may find out that you still have a lot of liability because you're not really fully meeting the intent.
Right. And so I do believe there's pieces in here like elevate communication, automate as much as possible are very valid conversations. But I think the premise of the article kind of misses the point. Like, compliance is actually, in my opinion, sometimes slowing security down. We need to elevate both of these as risk areas, create a understanding of risk, and then prioritize whether it's a security or a compliance requirement and how you want to move the ball forward. Otherwise, we're going to stay in the same checkbox mentality we've been in for 20 plus years, and that's not going to move the needle.
It's almost like a bad dream that just keeps coming back, isn't it?
Need a breath there, Matt.
I read these articles every week and I'm like, oh, really? We're still writing about this stuff some days? Like, can't we just actually do something about? Anyways, next article, fostering a cybersecurity-first culture, key leadership insights for building resilient businesses. Now, again, this ties back a little bit to the first article where only 2% of businesses were even working on business resiliency, right? I mean, So what do I have to do? Well, there's some tips in here on how to start to go down that path. It starts with leadership, folks. Like your CEO actually has to be serious about building a resilient business, because otherwise nothing's going to happen.
Right. And has to influence the board members to prioritize it. How about that? Step 1, step 2, buy-in from the CEO and influence the board of directors to actually support all of this.
Yeah, it's tone at the top, right? And then, look, that leadership commitment to security. Okay, well, let's actually enable the CISO to do his dang job.
Right.
Give him a seat at the darn table.
All of those other things will not happen unless those two happen.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not going to be able to promote successfully cross-departmental collaboration if you don't have buy-in from the CEO and the board. Not going to happen. How are you going to get funded for education and advanced training? How are you going to set policies and procedures? How are you going to get money for monitoring or staff for monitoring? None of those happen unless those first two happen.
Well, you look, we all have kids, right? And so, when you're trying to get your kids to do something, if you and your wife are at cross paths on what you're trying to get them to do, your kids will know that, one of you isn't serious and they'll just ignore the other one. Right. And so that's kind of the key, right? You've got to have the CEO and the board engaged and saying, we take this seriously and this is the CISO and we are empowering him to do the job. And when somebody comes and says, oh, we don't want to do it because we can't release the product. And hey, well, why didn't you think about that ahead of, getting to the point where you're ready to release the project? Why didn't you think about that before you created this sales initiative or this marketing campaign? I'm going to hold you responsible for not doing the right things with the CISO and working in a partnership. If you don't do that, then every other exec and every other team is going to see that person, whoever it is, whatever the role or title is, as not responsible for it. And they're just going to ignore it, right? So it all starts from there. That is the core focus, and where I would say if your security program isn't on, 98% of the time, it's that.
That's it. And again, it goes back to that's not the hill they're going to want to die on. If they know you have no power, no influence, no way to move things forward, they're not going to be behind. They're not going to have your back.
Right.
It's not the hill they're going to want to die on.
Yes. And so in our final article, strategic leadership in challenging times. We just had a few of those. We're just talking through those lessons from Dale Carnegie. So this article talks about his experience and how he leveraged some of his Dale Carnegie stuff in order to get through challenging times. And if we think about, we put the CISO in this position, right? You're trying to get buy-in from your leadership. You're trying to figure out how to put a program together. As a leader, what if you're not, even if you're in the seat, you still have to do some of these other things, right? So it's a great little kind of refresher on some of the things you have to do as a leader, regardless of kind of the power you've been given in some respects. But how do you build trust, right, in the organization? We talked about this again in that first segment, right, Jason? You got to build a level of trust. Even with politicians, right? You also have to know where your North Star is, where is your line that you won't cross.
That whole building a culture of trust and performance isn't always necessarily out of the gate from the top down.
Yeah.
Because here's a good strategy, and I've actually had to use it before. When you've had conversations with all of your peers, all of your colleagues, and you're all on a united front, and you sit in front of that CEO and say, we are all on the same page here. We need you on the same page. That can be very powerful because some organizations may not right out of the gate have that culture of cybersecurity or want to give away that seat at the table. Go earn it, right? If you can build those tight relationships with those department heads, those division heads, and bring a united front to the table, we're saying that this is important. Right? This is important and we need you to support this. That can be a good tactic right out of the gate.
Yeah, that's why relationships are key, right? We've talked about that a lot. You have to build the right relationships within the org, right? Build a relationship with the CFO, with your head of legal, right? Figure out who in that C-staff or who in the board, somebody's going to be the power player there, right? And figure out if you can align yourself that way.
Yeah, because if you don't, you're going to have a very, very difficult path forward. You just will. You're not going to get what you need. You're going to get frustrated. Then you're going to be one of those that leaves and goes somewhere else just to probably face it all over again, which is why I think
at the end of it, it'll be 100% tactical. It'll be 100% tactical, and there won't be any strategy because you won't be able to influence at that level.
That's right. And are you going to be happy in that role? And if you're not, then make sure you don't put yourself back in that position in your next role. Yeah. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.